In the morning, if my face is a little puffy, I'll put on an ice pack while doing my stomach crunches.
What makes a monster? Or perhaps more disturbingly, what makes a monster human?
A census taker once tried to test me. I ate his liver with some fava beans and a nice Chianti.
We've always been fascinated by those who walk among us, wearing human skin but seemingly missing something we consider fundamentally human.
I am the one who knocks.
We call them sociopaths, antisocial personalities, psychopaths. We give them labels to separate them from us, to draw a clear line between their darkness and our light. But what if that line isn't as clear as we'd like to believe? These individuals force us to confront uncomfortable questions about human nature, about consciousness, about morality itself. Today, we're diving into the mind of a sociopath, not to glorify, but to understand the philosophical questions they force us to confront about what makes us human. Because maybe, just maybe, the scariest thing about sociopaths isn't how different they are from us, but how similar they are to what we could become.
Transporter of gods! The golden god!
Defining a sociopath is like trying to catch smoke with your bare hands. The moment you think you've grasped it, it slips through your fingers, taking a new form. In 1930, the term psychopathic personality emerged in psychiatric literature. By the 1950s, sociopath entered the lexicon. Different words attempting to describe the same shadowy corner of human consciousness. Like Dexter Morgan's blood slides, we try to categorize and contain these individuals in neat little boxes. Clinical definitions tell us about shallow emotions, lack of empathy, manipulative behavior. But these are just symptoms of something far more complex. What makes these definitions so challenging isn't what these individuals do, it's what they appear to be. They walk among us, wearing masks so perfect that sometimes even they forget they're wearing them. Modern neuroscience has identified differences in the sociopathic brain, reduced grey matter in regions associated with empathy and moral reasoning. But this raises a philosophical puzzle that dates back to Descartes. If consciousness arises from the physical brain, what happens when that brain is fundamentally different? Consider Hannibal Lecter, brilliant, cultured, capable of appreciating beauty and forming attachments, yet entirely divorced from conventional morality. Is his consciousness fundamentally different from ours, or is it merely operating on a different set of principles? This question becomes even more complex in our modern world. Corporate structures often reward sociopathic traits, emotional detachment, ruthless decision-making, superficial charm. Are we creating environments where the absence of empathy becomes not just normal, but advantageous? The cultural fascination with sociopathy reveals something uncomfortable about ourselves. We recognize these traits because they exist on a spectrum that runs through all of us. The capacity for emotional detachment, for rationalization, for seeing others as means rather than ends. These aren't alien qualities, they're human qualities taken to their extreme. Perhaps what makes sociopathy so difficult to define isn't its foreignness, but its familiarity. It's not a separate category of human consciousness, but rather a dark reflection of qualities we all possess to varying degrees. Modern psychiatry has moved away from simple labels, recognizing that antisocial personality traits exist on a spectrum. But this medical model, while useful for treatment, doesn't address the deeper philosophical questions. What is the relationship between empathy and consciousness? Can someone lacking emotional resonance with others still be considered fully human? Or are they perhaps more human than we'd like to admit? Like these blood slides, each attempt to define sociopathy tells us something true, but incomplete. The clinical definition captures the symptoms, but misses the essence. The philosophical perspective raises questions but provides few answers, and our cultural understanding remains clouded by fascination and fear. What we're left with isn't a definition at all, but a mirror, one that reflects back not just the face of sociopathy, but the nature of consciousness itself.
Well, I hate to break it to you, but there is no big lie. There is no system. The universe is indifferent.
In 1941, psychiatrist Hervey Cleckley published a work that would fundamentally change our understanding of sociopathy. He called it The Mask of Sanity, and in doing so, he captured something profound, not just about sociopaths, but about the nature of identity itself. The mask metaphor is deceptively simple. We all wear masks, adapting our behavior to different social situations. The difference, Cleckley argued, was that for sociopaths, there is no authentic face beneath the mask, or perhaps more disturbingly, the mask is all they've ever known.
There is an idea of a Patrick Bateman, some kind of abstraction, but there is no real me, only an entity.
This brings us to a fundamental philosophical question that Jean-Paul Sartre grappled with: the concept of bad faith. Sartre argued that human beings often engage in self-deception, playing roles while denying their fundamental freedom and responsibility. But what happens when someone's entire existence becomes a performance?
If I'm going to have a past, I prefer it to be multiple choice.
The Joker's multiple choice past represents more than just unreliable narration. It's a direct challenge to our assumptions about authentic identity. In a world of perpetual performance, what does authenticity even mean? This question has become even more relevant in our digital age. We curate our online personas, filter our experiences, present carefully constructed versions of ourselves. Are we all, in some sense, becoming more sociopathic in our relationship with identity? Consider Don Draper, a man who literally stole another man's identity. Yet throughout Mad Men, we see him struggling with a question that haunts both sociopaths and philosophers alike. If you pretend to be something long enough, do you become that thing? Modern neuroscience suggests that our brains physically change based on our habitual behaviors and thought patterns. The mask, in other words, can literally shape the face beneath it. This raises disturbing questions about the nature of personality disorders. Are they innate, or are they learned performances that became permanent?
All good things to those who wait.
The sociopath's performance isn't just about deception, it's about power. By understanding and mimicking normal human behavior, they gain the ability to manipulate it. They become, in essence, method actors who never break character because they've forgotten their acting. The truly unsettling implication of Cleckley's work isn't that sociopaths are good at pretending to be normal. It's that they've identified something fundamental about how all human beings construct their personalities. We are all, to some degree, performing versions of ourselves. In many ways, modern society has institutionalized this kind of performance. We praise "fake it till you make it." We encourage people to brand themselves. We've created entire industries around the cultivation of artificial personas. The difference between the sociopath and the average person might not be the presence of the mask, but the absence of discomfort with wearing it. While most of us feel a disconnect between our authentic selves and our social performances, the sociopath has transcended this distinction entirely. This brings us to a darker question. In a world increasingly built around performance and presentation, are sociopathic traits becoming more adaptive? Are we creating a society that not only accommodates the mask, but rewards it? The mask has always been a powerful symbol in human culture, representing both concealment and revelation, protection and power. The sociopath's mask of sanity isn't just a tool of deception. It's a mirror reflecting our own complex relationship with identity and authenticity. Perhaps the most disturbing aspect of the mask of sanity isn't its effectiveness at concealing what lies beneath, but its ability to make us question whether there's anything beneath our own masks at all. In the end, the sociopath's greatest insight might be this: Sanity itself is, in many ways, a performance. The only difference is that most of us never fully commit to the role.
Call it. Call it, yes.
The coin flip, a perfect metaphor for the sociopathic approach to moral decision-making. Not because it's random, but because it removes human agency from the equation entirely. The coin removes responsibility. It makes murder as simple as mathematics. When Immanuel Kant formulated his categorical imperative, act only according to that maxim by which you can, at the same time, will that it should become a universal law, he was attempting to create an objective foundation for morality. But what happens when someone can imagine a world where everyone acts without empathy and finds that world perfectly acceptable? Consider Light Yagami, who believes he can create a better world through selective murder. His logic is pristine, his goals arguably noble. He wants to eliminate evil, yet in doing so, he becomes what he sought to destroy.
This is my perfect victory! That's right! I win!
The sociopath's dilemma isn't that they can't understand morality, it's that they see it as merely another system to be gamed. The famous trolley problem asks whether it's moral to sacrifice one life to save 5. Most people struggle with this decision, their emotional and rational minds in conflict. But for the sociopathic mind, there is no conflict. It's simple arithmetic. 5 is greater than 1. Hannibal Lecter represents perhaps the most sophisticated exploration of sociopathic morality. He has a code, albeit one that most would find abhorrent. He transforms murder into art, cruelty into cuisine. His actions follow a precise internal logic that raises uncomfortable questions about the nature of moral relativism. When Nietzsche wrote about going beyond good and evil, he wasn't advocating for amorality, but rather questioning the foundations of conventional morality. Yet his work has often been misappropriated by those seeking to justify their own absence of moral constraints. The sociopath forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth. Our society often rewards sociopathic decision-making, as long as it's done at scale. A CEO laying off thousands to increase shareholder value is considered shrewd. An individual exploiting others for personal gain is considered criminal. The only difference is the level of abstraction. Utilitarian philosophy, with its focus on maximizing good for the greatest number, can be twisted to justify almost anything. The sociopath simply redefines what good means, usually in terms that benefit themselves. They're not ignoring moral philosophy, they're weaponizing it.
What you got ain't nothing new. This country's hard on people. You can't stop what's coming.
The determinism in Chiguru's worldview reflects another aspect of sociopathic moral philosophy, the denial of free will as a way to abdicate responsibility. If everything is predetermined, nothing is truly a choice, and therefore nothing can be truly wrong. For most people, moral decisions involve a complex interplay of emotion, reason, and learned social behavior. We feel guilt when we harm others. We experience empathy that prevents us from seeing people as mere means to an end. But what if these emotional guardrails were removed? What would reason alone dictate? The most chilling aspect of sociopathic moral philosophy isn't its cruelty, it's its coherence. Given their starting premises, their conclusions often follow logically. They expose the fragility of moral systems that rely on emotional responses rather than pure reason. This brings us to a fundamental question. Is empathy necessary for morality? Can pure reason provide sufficient grounds for ethical behavior? Philosophers have debated this for centuries, but sociopaths force us to confront it in real terms. The tragedy of characters like Light Yagami isn't that they're evil, it's that they're rational. They follow their premises to their logical conclusions. The problem lies not in their reasoning, but in their initial assumptions about the nature of good, evil, and human value. In our increasingly complex world, we face moral decisions that emotion alone cannot navigate. Artificial intelligence, climate change, global economics, these require careful, rational analysis. Yet the sociopath reminds us of the dangers of pure rationality divorced from human empathy. Perhaps the most valuable insight we can gain from studying sociopathic moral philosophy is this: reason alone is not enough. Logic without empathy can justify anything. The challenge isn't to choose between emotion and reason, but to find a way to integrate both. In the end, the sociopath's greatest contribution to moral philosophy might be showing us exactly why we need both heart and mind to navigate the complexities of ethical behavior.
Advertising has us chasing cars and clothes, working jobs we hate so we can buy shit we don't need.
There's a dark irony in how our society both condemns and cultivates sociopathic behavior. We're repulsed by individual acts of manipulation and exploitation, yet we've built economic and social systems that reward these very traits at scale. Consider the modern financial system. In 1987, Gordon Gekko told us, "Greed is good." By 2013, Jordan Belfort showed us just how far that philosophy could go. But behind these theatrical villains lies a more disturbing truth. They're not aberrations of capitalism, they're its logical conclusion. Look at the language of modern business. Kill the competition, crush your targets, be ruthless in pursuit of excellence. We've created environments where empathy is often seen as a weakness, where emotional detachment is a virtue, where the ability to lay off thousands without flinching is considered leadership. But it goes beyond just business. Social media has gamified human interaction, reducing relationships to metrics, turning empathy into a marketable commodity. We count our friends, measure our influence, optimize our personalities for maximum engagement. Sound familiar? These are textbook sociopathic traits, normalized and monetized. The tech industry's mantra of move fast and break things is particularly telling. It's not just about innovation, it's about detachment from consequences. When Mark Zuckerberg launched Facebook from his dorm room, his early emails showed a callous disregard for user privacy. Today, that's not considered scandalous, it's considered visionary. When American Psycho was released, Patrick Bateman was seen as a satirical extreme. Today, his obsession with status symbols, his carefully curated personality, his constant comparison to his peers, these behaviors wouldn't even stand out on LinkedIn. The satire has become our reality. The modern startup ecosystem practically demands sociopathic traits. Fake it till you make it isn't just advice, it's a business model. Elizabeth Holmes modeled herself after Steve Jobs, wearing the same clothes, adopting the same mannerisms. The only difference between a visionary and a fraud is whether the performance pays off. We've created what philosopher Jean Baudrillard would call a hyper-reality, a world where the performance of authenticity is more valuable than authenticity itself. Influencers perfect their authentic moments. Corporate leaders hire consultants to seem more genuine. We're all participating in a grand performance. The sociopath's ability to view others as objects to be manipulated isn't just tolerated in consumer capitalism, it's essential. Marketing departments study how to trigger insecurities, create artificial needs, manipulate emotions. We call it business intelligence. A century ago, we might have called it exploitation. Silicon Valley's obsession with disruption is particularly revealing. It's not enough to create something new, you must destroy what came before. The human cost is considered an externality, a number in a spreadsheet. This isn't just business strategy, it's sociopathy at scale. Look at how we celebrate our business leaders. The ability to remain calm under pressure, to make decisions without emotional interference, to prioritize objectives over relationships. These are traits we reward handsomely. They're also key diagnostic criteria for antisocial personality disorder. The numbers tell a striking story. Studies suggest that about 1% of the general population exhibits sociopathic traits, but among CEOs, that number jumps to 4 to 8%. We haven't just accommodated sociopathic behavior, we've created selection pressures that favor it. And what about the rest of us? Studies show that excessive social media use correlates with increased narcissistic traits, decreased empathy, and reduced ability to form deep emotional connections. We're not just enabling sociopathic behavior, we're inducing it.
You're not how much money you have in the bank. You're not the car you drive. You're not the contents of your wallet. You're not your fucking khakis.
The tragic irony is that while we claim to value emotional intelligence and authentic connection, we've built systems that actively discourage both. The sociopath isn't an aberration in this system, they're its perfect product. We're all now engaged in personal branding, curating our images, optimizing our appearances. The line between authentic self-expression and strategic self-promotion has become impossibly blurred. The sociopath's greatest insight might be that they simply saw this reality before the rest of us. Perhaps the most disturbing question isn't why sociopaths exist, but whether our society is creating more of them every day.
I did it for me. I liked it. I was good at it. I was alive.
The most frightening truth about sociopathy isn't its alienness, it's its familiarity. The myth of pure evil, the idea that there are monsters and then there's us, is perhaps our most dangerous self-deception. When Hannah Arendt covered the trial of Nazi officer Adolf Eichmann, she expected to face a monster. Instead, she found something far more disturbing: a bureaucrat. A man who spoke in clichés, who seemed more concerned with his career prospects than the magnitude of his crimes. This led her to coin the phrase, the banality of evil. Michael Corleone's transformation from war hero to cold-blooded mafia boss isn't a story of corruption, it's a story of adaptation. Each decision, each compromise, each act of violence is justified by necessity, by family, by business. The path to sociopathy isn't always dramatic, sometimes it's just practical. Consider the major corporate scandals of our time: Enron, WorldCom, Theranos. Behind each one, we find not cackling villains, but people who gradually normalized deviant behavior. They didn't set out to become criminals, they simply made a series of decisions, each one slightly more ethically flexible than the last. Neuroscience tells us something fascinating. Our capacity for empathy isn't fixed. It can be strengthened through practice or weakened through disuse. Every time we choose to ignore others' suffering for our convenience, we're slightly rewiring our brains. The sociopath might simply be further along this path. The role of trauma in developing sociopathic traits presents another challenge to the myth of pure evil. Studies show significant correlations between childhood trauma and adult antisocial behavior. The monster in the boardroom might have once been a victim in the playground. The Stanford prison experiment, the Milgram experiment, the countless real-world examples of ordinary people committing extraordinary acts of cruelty. These all point to an uncomfortable truth. The capacity for sociopathic behavior exists within all of us. The right circumstances, the right pressures, the right incentives can bring it to the surface. Modern psychology has moved away from viewing sociopathy as a binary condition. Instead, it's increasingly understood as a spectrum of traits that exist to varying degrees in all people. The label sociopath might say more about our need to categorize than about the nature of human behavior. Popular culture's obsession with villain origin stories reflects our desperate need to understand and distance ourselves from evil. We want to believe there's a defining moment, a clear line between normal and monstrous, but reality is rarely so clean. The truly dangerous sociopaths aren't the ones who fit our theatrical expectations. They're the ones who understand social norms well enough to exploit them, who can weaponize our assumptions about human nature, who can turn our desire to see the good in people against us. Walter White's journey from mild-mannered teacher to drug kingpin resonates because it follows a believable progression. Each step is rationalized, each escalation justified. He doesn't lose his humanity. He exercises parts of it that were always there, just dormant. The evil genius trope, while dramatic, obscures a more nuanced truth. Studies suggest that sociopaths often have average to above-average intelligence, but their real skill lies in emotional manipulation, understanding human nature well enough to exploit it. Perhaps the most insidious aspect of sociopathy is how it can spread through systems and cultures. One person's moral compromise becomes another's standard operating procedure. Yesterday's ethical line becomes today's starting point. This understanding has profound implications for treatment and prevention. If sociopathy isn't innate evil but learned behavior, then it can potentially be unlearned. If it's a spectrum rather than a binary, then we can work to move along that spectrum in either direction. The tragedy of Michael Corleone isn't that he was corrupted by power, it's that he was corrupted by his own rationality. Each decision made perfect sense in isolation. The path to hell, as they say, is paved with logical conclusions. In the end, the myth of pure evil doesn't protect us from sociopathy. It makes us more vulnerable to it. Because while we're looking for monsters, the real danger lies in ordinary people making ordinary compromises, one rational decision at a time. We began this journey with Patrick Bateman's morning routine, a man meticulously crafting his exterior while harboring an interior void. Now, looking at this scene again, we might see something different. Not just a monster wearing a human mask, but a mirror reflecting our own careful constructions of self. Throughout this exploration, we've peeled back layers of comfortable assumptions about sociopathy, morality, and human nature. Each layer revealed something more unsettling than the last, not because of what it showed us about sociopaths, but because of what it showed us about ourselves. We've seen how the line between normal and pathological behavior isn't as clear as we might wish, how our social media profiles aren't so different from Bateman's carefully constructed persona, how our corporate structures reward the very traits we claim to despise in individuals.
Quid pro quo. I tell you things, you tell me things. Not about this case, though.
The sociopath's greatest insight might be their recognition of how transactional human relationships can be. While we shroud our exchanges in emotion and social convention, they see the underlying mechanics, the give and take, the cost-benefit analyses we all unconsciously perform. We've explored how sociopathy exists on a spectrum, how trauma and circumstance can push anyone along this continuum. The comfortable distance between us and them has collapsed. The monster in the mirror has our face. Our economic systems haven't just accommodated sociopathic behavior, they've institutionalized it. We've created environments where emotional detachment is professional, where empathy is inefficient, where success often requires the suppression of our most human qualities. Meanwhile, our digital lives increasingly reward superficial connection over genuine intimacy. We've gamified human interaction, quantified relationships, turned authenticity itself into a performance. The sociopath's worldview hasn't conquered our society. Our society has evolved to reflect their worldview. The tragedy of characters like Walter White isn't that they're inhuman, it's that they're all too human. They show us how rational decisions, each justified in isolation, can lead to monstrous conclusions. They remind us that the capacity for evil doesn't require malice. Sometimes logic alone is enough. Hannah Arendt's insight about the banality of evil becomes more relevant every day. The greatest threats to human welfare don't come from cackling villains, but from ordinary people making spreadsheet decisions, following incentive structures, optimizing for efficiency over empathy. But understanding this spectrum of human behavior also offers hope. If sociopathic traits can be learned, they can be unlearned. If systems can encourage emotional detachment, they can be redesigned to nurture connection. If empathy can be suppressed, it can also be cultivated. Perhaps the most important lesson isn't about sociopaths at all, it's about the rest of us, about the daily choices we make between empathy and efficiency, between genuine connection and strategic performance, between seeing people as ends in themselves or means to an end. The face in Patrick Bateman's mirror isn't just his, it's ours. The void he feels isn't unique to sociopaths. It's the same emptiness we all grapple with in a world that increasingly values performance over authenticity, metrics over meaning, success over connection. The philosophy of sociopathy ultimately teaches us not about monsters, but about ourselves, about the fragility of our moral frameworks, the malleability of our empathy, and the endless human capacity for both connection and detachment. Perhaps what terrifies us most about sociopaths is not their difference from us, but their similarity to what we could become, what we might be becoming. One spreadsheet, one post, one compromise at a time.